we pause for a second or two. This is episode 190, Fantasy Material. In life, when we live our lives, all the time we come across situations, or we move from one situation to another where we are challenged, where we face great difficulty in reconciling every part. It is difficult to assemble our lives into a coherent whole. It is very difficult to make sense of our lives in such a way that all parts, every single part, is both its own thing, but also part of the whole. It is very difficult, and it demands of us constant effort, constant work. And still, even if we put in constant work, we still feel like we are lacking, that we can't really reconcile everything, that we can't really fit everything together. It doesn't really, it's very elusive, it's very tricky. When we try to learn about how to do this, anyway, we try to reconcile all the parts. What we make use of is that in between, so to speak, in between two parts which are difficult to reconcile or difficult to combine, in between those two contrasting things, we fill in the blank, we fill in the gap with our fantasy, our creativity, our something more or less magical, hard to explain, something like a bridge. That is what our fantasies are for, to bridge things that we have a hard time combining. Today's episode is called Fantasy Material. And what we're doing today is that we are talking about the different materials that we use in order to develop our fantasies, in order to own our skills, in order to sort of gain new ideas, be influenced by how other people have bridged gaps through their fantasy. And we cannot survive without fantasy material. If you take away fantasy material from a person, he will go nuts. He will lose his mind, because it is so important to be able to bridge all different parts of our life using our fantasy. So what kind of fantasy material we use and where we get it and who we get it from is extremely important. And I'm saying it again because it's not a hyperbole, it's just the truth. It is extremely important what fantasy materials we use and where we get it from and from whom. It's very important. So, when we talk about fantasy material, it is most clear to talk about the different sort of mediums or the different sort of kinds of materials. So our most intimate fantasy material is ourselves and our dreams and our daydreaming. That is the most sort of basic part of it. Every night we dream, and through our dreaming we make sense of everything. Might not seem logically like it all fits together, but emotionally our dreams helps us fit everything together. And then we have our daydreaming, which are a version of night dreaming. They are two sides of the same coin. And then we can move on to sort of the next layer or next level of fantasy material. And that is when the fantasy material is sort of made into something physical that is outside of our bodies. And that can be books, can be paintings and drawings, can be images, can be when we play music and make recordings, CDs. It can be movies on DVDs or on videotape. So we have something physical containing the fantasy material. That is sort of the second layer or level of fantasy material. And then we have the third layer, the third level, which is when the fantasy material is in something exterior. It's not inside of us, it's outside of us. But it is not in a physical object we can sort of have for ourselves. But instead, the fantasy material is shared in a sort of internet kind of way. And then the fantasy material is shared. So if something is up on the internet, then many people at once can access the same fantasy material. And then the fantasy material is no longer just at the reach of one person. So these are the three sort of important layers to bear in mind when we talk about fantasy material. It's first the fantasies we keep inside of us, our dreams and daydreaming. And then we have the second layer, which are physical objects outside of us, something manifest outside of us, but still that it's only available to one person or available to us. That we sort of, I have a book in my bookshelf, let's say, or you have a CD with music. Those are the second layer. And then the third layer are when the fantasy material is manifest outside of our bodies, but it is also available to many people at once, like digital media, the internet, things like that. And now we move on to sort of what the episode is about. So now we have our definitions, how we keep our fantasy material inside our bodies, physically available for one person, or physically available or digitally available to many persons at the same time. These three sort of layers. Now we move on to why are these definitions important to bear in mind. So basically, it comes down to that we are at the same time, we are one person, but also part of a group or many groups of persons. And the fantasy materials and the three layers of fantasy materials are about how we relate as single persons with the collective, with the group. So let's say, for example, that one person only makes use of the first kind of fantasy material. This person only dreams and daydreams. We see it's difficult to imagine such a person living among other people. Such a person would probably live in the forest or in the wild and just be kind of like a hermit. A hermit is an example of a person who only makes use of this first kind of fantasy material. Like in Asia, they have these yogis. They just sit in a cave and just fantasize by themselves. That's all they do. They make use of no external fantasy material. No fantasy material of level 2 and 3. Only their personal, physical, interior fantasies. So when that kind of person, the sort of hermit person, makes use of only the first kind, we get a sense of what kind of relationship he has or does not have with other people. Do you see how this is starting to sort of become like a thing? When that person only makes use of his own interior fantasy material, it sort of determines what kind of role he can have in the social web, or what role he cannot have. And if we make more examples or talk about people making use of the second level and the third level, it gets complex or complicated very fast. and we will make use of this moment to just pause for a second or two and simply recognize that how we make use of the second and third level of fantasy material, then our relationships and our place in the social web quickly gets quite difficult to have an overview of, or perhaps impossible. So let's start slowly. Let's say let's say that you and I are watching the same movie. We're watching the same film. I am watching the movie on DVD. I have it externally on DVD. And let's say that you are watching the same movie, but as it is being streamed online, live streamed online to many people. And we are watching this same movie at different moments. So let's say that I am watching it first on DVD, and then you are watching it on this live stream together with other people, thousands of other people. We are watching the same movie. We are sort of being influenced by the same fantasy material. But at the same time, we are not. When I am watching this fantasy material on DVD, I know that only I am seeing this right now. It's sort of socially. I'm watching this DVD in a kind of hermit kind of way. It's not quite like the hermit because it's at the same time something external, but it's only me. It's only me and this fantasy material, albeit a physical fantasy material outside of my body. And in this example, you are sitting and watching the same movie, but you are sitting and watching it together with other people. You know, as you are watching, that thousands of other people are at the same time spending time with the same fantasy, the same bridge. You are standing on this bridge, the movie, the fantasy material, together with thousands of other people. Whereas I, in this example, am standing on the same bridge, but alone. And this difference makes all the difference. Because what happens is that if we are standing on that bridge together with thousands of other people, or if we are standing on that bridge, that very same bridge, but we're standing on it alone, then the shores or the sort of places the bridge are bridging to, from this to that, those places change depending on if we're standing on it alone or with other people. So imagine today is New Year's Eve. Imagine that tonight there will be at midnight, there will be this countdown to midnight from 10, 9, 8 down to 0. Imagine that I am watching this broadcast on TV live, and I'm watching it together with maybe 1 million other people. Then I'm standing on a fantasy bridge between two places, together with 1 million other people. But if you would watch a replay of this same broadcast, but you watch it tomorrow, you don't watch it live, you watch it tomorrow, then you are standing on the same fantasy bridge, but you're standing there alone. And the sort of places the bridge goes to and from will be different from the places I had when it was broadcast live. So today's episode has been an initial sort of attempt at discussing fantasy material, because it is very complex, it is very rich, it is very nuanced, and it changes all the time. And we have these 3 definitions of kinds of fantasy material or levels, and we sort of made some few initial comparisons between why these 3 different levels matter and how the same fantasy material can sort of mean different things to us on each of the 3 levels. The yogi in the cave can think of the same movie as I was watching on DVD and you were watching on the live stream with thousands of other people. The same fantasy material, but they mean completely different things to us because of how we made use of it, what kind of material we made use of, what level. Yes. That's it for today. Thank you. Oh, yeah, and Happy New Year.